I just want to point out that I don't believe there is a conflict of interest between men and women. I think that men and women are created to complete each other, to have stable families, and to raise healthy children. Like our parents got together and sacrificed so much so that we can exist here today, makes us have a responsibility towards the future generation to create stable households so that they can too enjoy at least the same amount of luxuries and benefits that we have, if not even a better lifestyle, which is the actual desirable thing. Now, throughout the course of human history, it was evident on why people should have children and why they should actually raise their children well. One of the main reasons was, well, to defend yourself against wars. There were other nations that tried to invade you, like in the case of Romania, we had the Ottoman Empire, the Huns, the Tatars, the Visigoths, the Goths, the Ostrogoths, a lot of other minorities that wanted to come here, plunder the land, rape women, and have their own way with the population. And that is why you needed to have a lot of kids in order to be able to fight off and defend what was yours. This is true throughout any single nation in entire human history. So one incentive to have children was, well, so you can have a strong military in order to defend yourself from other people who wanted to plunder your land. It's not something beautiful, but it is a reality. And if you look at the Disney Mulan movie, it actually says exactly that. You needed to have kids in order to defend you from the Huns. Other nations had the exact same mentality. This is not something that only existed in Western culture. As a matter of fact, the Soviet Union and Communist China, nations with a Marxist philosophy at their core who wanted to reorganize society, they still maintain this. The Soviet Union even offered the Order of Maternal Glory to the free classes of women. The first class would be mothers bearing and raising 9 children, the second would be 8, and the third would be 7. All of these patriotic medals was to encourage people to have as many children as possible. The second reason, and the more immediate one, was that when you grew old, someone had to take care of you. And the same way a parent took care of his children when they grew up and invested a lot of resources in order to make sure that they had a healthy lifestyle, so too now the children had the moral responsibility to take care of their parents when they are reaching a venerable age where they can't take care of themselves. But nowadays, all the responsibilities that exist are being thrown away to the government. The government is now the father in the household. The government now offers protection. People aren't expected to protect themselves. The government is providing for people. The people aren't expected to provide for themselves. The government thinks and educates for people. People aren't expected to think and educate themselves. And more importantly, the government is going to have an old person home for kids to throw their parents away into. Kids aren't expected to take care of their parents when they're getting older. Every single problem, real or imaginable, that mankind faces, will ever face, can be solved by the government. Just give more taxes to the government, let the people in charge have more power, and every single plight that the world has, from social justice to the weather, everything is going to be solved because the government is now God. And the government represents the patriarchy. The government is in your household and is very interested in your life. And because of that, we now have the luxury of pushing these incredibly divisive ideologies, which consider men and women of being separate entities in 2 different tribes which are at war with each other and have conflicting interests. So men and women aren't supposed to make families anymore. They're actually supposed to compete with each other in a struggle of obtaining power. And this is exactly what you see in this article from The Guardian. And notice that every time they talk about how women are being oppressed, they never show a picture of a university woman in the United States drinking her soy latte. They never show the wife of Joe Biden or the wife of Obama. No, they're usually going to show people from the third world that happen to be women. And I'm sorry to say, but if you actually show people in poverty, I can show children, I can show men, I can show elderly. Any picture that you would show from a place that is poverty-ridden is going to pull the heartstrings. But what they do is they just choose the women in order to show that, well, 80% of the women are being affected by whatever plight we can fix by having a more powerful government. And then they bring up the original sin, which some religious bigots used to have in the past, and the church doesn't believe that anymore, but they used to say that because the woman ate the apple from the tree and then give it to Adam, the women are responsible for most bad things in society. They're now saying, well, because men have ruled the world up until now, then men are responsible for all the plight in society, and because of that, instead of trying to have equality, they're not even saying that anymore, like they don't even want 50-50 representation. In this article, the UN is asking for women to take charge. And obviously, I doubt that they mean these women in these pictures. I don't think like this little girl, which we can see in the picture of the Guardian, is ever going to get a position of power thanks to the UN. I don't think it's your sister that's going to be asked to be on the UN. No, it's also rich women, empowered women that have a lot of connections and already they have amassed a lot of wealth. Those are the people that we expect to see more of. And of course, an army of powerful men that are sitting behind them, propping them up, throwing money at them from various corporations in order to create those women into sock puppets that are just going to be their talking heads. This is the future that the United Nations want for us. And what's interesting is that when they say that, oh, well, men did bad things, they don't show a picture of Joe Biden, they don't show a picture of Obama or any of the Democrats or the actual leaders that are now in power like Justin Trudeau, men that actually rule the world. No, they're talking about you, or they're talking about your brother or your father or your grandfather or your son. They're talking about your family members who are responsible for every illness that society has, including the weather. Not because John has done anything differently than Susan next door, but it's because John was born a man. And that is his sin, and he needs to own up to it. Because every single man has a Bluetooth in their cock, and they operate like the Borg. They have a hive mind, and they are conspiring against not just women, but the planet as a whole. What I find interesting is that if they actually conclude that the world up until this day was ruled by men, they don't actually ever celebrate any of the achievements that we have managed to accomplish, such as the internet, such as being able to live better than a king from medieval France because you can actually shit inside your house rather than go to a PV. They don't account for penicillin, they don't account for electricity, nuclear power, or any of the things. No, everything that man did is evil. Which is kind of interesting because if you actually look at some of the more progressive documentaries, they will say, well, hold on a little bit, like all these inventions, the cell phone, electricity, the internet, had women contributing, and women should also be given credit for these things, like electricity, but then they also say, well, electricity is actually harming the planet because it's made from coals, and because of that, it releases CO2 in the air, and electricity is actually made by men, so men should be responsible. And it's very interesting, right? So when it's about giving credit, it gives credit to the women. When it's about taking away credit and assigning blame, is giving it to the men. And all of this ideology is meant to spark division. If you're a man, you're meant with this ideology to feel resentment for the women that are blaming you on everything and start hating your fellow neighbor. If you're a woman, you're, well, meant to do the exact same thing, but towards men. It's an ideology that's meant to divide rather than to bring people together, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to. Now, the reason they do this is again because of the destruction of the family unit. Men and women don't need each other anymore, they need more of the government. As such, the people in power realize that they can mix two of the most dangerous ideologies that mankind has ever created. One of them is Marxism, which is the oppressor-oppressed dichotomy on steroids. The other one is Nazism, which is identity politics on steroids. And by mixing these two ideologies, the people in charge realize that by turning citizen against citizen, they're not going to look at what the government is doing, they're not going to criticize those in power. Instead, they can actually look at those in power and say that they are oppressed. Yes, every single woman that goes to the United Nations is being heavily oppressed, and little Johnny across the street is responsible for that. So you need to look at with a frowny face to evil Johnny and look with a big smile on her face to the women that actually are in power, like Nicola Sturgeon, and admire and worship them by voting them and paying more taxes to them so that they can make all your problems go away. And this is why I can never agree with these types of ideologies nor take these people seriously. This is not a grassroots movement, it's just another movement where the elites have realized how to gain power and how to oppress people even further. This is nothing new, by the way. Even during Lenin's revolution and Soviet Russia, they were promised that only with communism can you have equality between men and women. Which is very interesting because the United Nations doesn't even want to approach that topic. So I will take their word for it and assume that even under communism, men and women didn't achieve equality. And even under communism, it was still men that managed to carry the torch and rule society. As such, I have a question. Why should I believe the UN when we just see history repeating itself?